long before anyone called it Angkor Wat. This was an empire's heartbeat, a sprawling city of canals and temples, palaces and reservoirs, housing nearly 1 million people and ruling much of mainland Southeast Asia. And almost no one can tell you what happened to it. To the outside world, these ruins were a ghost story, a myth whispered by locals and eventually found by explorers. But the truth was far more staggering. This wasn't just a temple. It was the heart of a 400 square mile stone machine. Today, we decode the rise and the mysterious mechanical failure of the Khmer Empire. But to understand how it failed, we must first understand the sheer scale of what it was. Because for centuries, the world simply forgot. It's hard to imagine a city of 1 million people just vanishing. In 1431, the last king of Angkor looked back at his city one final time, then turned south and never returned. The court followed, the administrators followed, the soldiers followed. Only the monks remained. No one recorded why. The jungle moved in, and the greatest city on earth became a secret kept by trees. It began in the year 802. On the sacred plateau of Phnom Kulen, a leader named Jayavarman II performed the unthinkable. He didn't just claim a crown, he claimed divinity. Through the Devaraja ritual, he became a god king, the bridge between the heavens and the earth. He unified warring tribes under a single divine identity. And from this mountain, he looked down upon the lowlands and saw a blank canvas for an empire. This was the start of Angkor. The god kings who built monuments that no civilization on earth has ever surpassed. The stone faces, 200 of them, stared into the jungle and waited. They are still waiting. Today, we tell the story of the empire that tried to destroy the world around them and discovered in the end that even gods are not immune to time. To understand Angkor, you have to understand the rain. In the medieval world, food was power, and the Khmer had a secret. While most civilizations were at the mercy of the monsoon, the Khmer decided to own it. They engineered the landscape to grow 3 crops of rice a year instead of 1. While London and Paris were still muddy villages, Angkor was a metropolis of 1 million people, the largest pre-industrial city on the planet. This wasn't just luck, it was a calculated victory over nature. They built Barays, gigantic man-made lakes so vast they are clearly visible from space. The West Baray alone held over 50 million cubic meters of water. This was the empire's battery. By trapping the summer rains, they could feed their crops all year round. This surplus of rice didn't just feed people, it funded armies, it built monuments, and it turned a jungle into a global superpower. With a stomach full of rice and a heart full of divine purpose, the Khmer turned their attention to the heavens. Stone by stone, they began to build. These weren't just buildings. They were cosmologies in miniature. Mountains made of sandstone, moats that represented the cosmic oceans. Under kings like Suryavarman II, the empire pushed its borders further than ever before, reaching into modern-day Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam. But this expansion came with a price. And yet, for all its cracks, the machine still dazzled. At its peak, Angkor was a spectacle of gold and silk. Envoys from the Chinese emperor wrote of towers clad in precious metals and a city that never seemed to sleep. This was the trade hub of the East, a place where exotic spices, forest resins, and elephant ivory were traded for fine porcelain and fine ideas. It was a civilization that believed it had reached the pinnacle of human achievement. They thought their walls were eternal and their gods were invincible. Behind the silk and the gold, behind the festival drums and the temple incense, something vast and invisible held it all together. A machinery of human order so intricate, so precise, that it ran like a second heartbeat beneath the city's skin. But this wasn't just a city of merchants. It was a masterpiece of order. A massive bureaucracy of governors and scholars tracked every harvest on stone tablets, while the streets thrived with life. During festivals, the Great Lake was crowded with ritual boat races, and the air in the temple courtyards was thick with incense and the sound of bells. It was a civilization at its zenith, a place where the line between the earthly and the divine was blurred by music, dance, and a deep reverence for the ancestors. Beyond the stone walls, the streets of Angkor were a theater of color and sound. Life centered around the great temple courtyards, where the gods weren't just distant statues. They were the guests of honor. During the sacred festivals, the city transformed. Tens of thousands gathered to watch ritual boat races that churned the Great Lake into a foam of gold, while masked dancers, the Apsaras, performed the ancient sagas of the heavens beneath clouds of swirling incense. It was a culture of divine abundance, where every dance, every song, and every prayer was an offering to the stone faces that watched over them. But this spiritual beauty was held together by a rigid earthly order. At the summit of this civilization sat the Devaraja, the divine king, the bridge between the people and the heavens. This was an absolute monarchy that operated through a strict hierarchy of royal elites and high priests. To keep the machine running, the king placed his own family in regional centers across the empire, ensuring that the central government's grip reached the furthest corners of the jungle. It was a masterpiece of control where the king's word was as eternal as the stone. Yet, an empire that believed itself to be heaven on earth eventually drew the attention of those below. The Khmer weren't just building a paradise, they were building a target. To the east, the kingdom of Champa watched with a mixture of envy and dread, while the Khmer looked back at Champa's coastal trade routes with the same hunger. These were two superpowers fueled by pride and economic jealousy, moving toward an inevitable collision. The peace was a fragile glass dome, and the first cracks were about to appear. In 1177, the unthinkable happened. The Champa didn't march through the jungle where the Khmer expected them. Instead, they took to the water. A massive fleet of warships sailed up the Mekong and into the Great Lake, striking the heart of Angkor before the God King could even mobilize his guard. The city of gold was pillaged. The temples were stained with smoke. For the first time in centuries, the Khmer looked at their stone gods and realized they were bleeding. The empire was on the brink of total collapse. In the wake of this devastation, a new leader emerged from the smoke, one whose resolve would redefine the empire's destiny. The Khmer did not retreat. Instead, they regrouped on the very waters that had betrayed them. The Tonle Sap became a theater of vengeance. Hundreds of war canoes, packed with archers and elite infantry, clashed in a desperate struggle for survival. This was no distant naval engagement. It was brutal. Hand-to-hand combat fought on blood-slicked platforms. To this day, the temple bas-reliefs preserve the carnage. Warriors cast into the jaws of crocodiles, and the lake choked with the debris of broken ships. By the time the sun set, the Khmer had reclaimed their heartland. Yet the scars of the war remained. They were no longer just a city of gods. They were a nation forged in fire. Out of the trauma of the invasion, a new vision for Angkor was born. Jayavarman II did not just rebuild the capital, he reimagined it. He turned away from the old gods of war and toward the compassion of the Buddha. His crowning achievement was the Bayon, a forest of stone towers carved with hundreds of serene, massive faces. These weren't just images of the divine, they were the faces of the king himself, watching over his people in every direction, promising a peace that would never again be broken. Jayavarman's obsession went beyond stone monuments. He treated the empire as a living organism. He constructed a massive network of raised highways and over 100 hospitals, ensuring that the wealth of the capital finally flowed to the furthest provinces. Under his reign, Angkor reached its greatest physical extent, but the focus had shifted. It was no longer just about the power of the king. It was about the welfare of the state. This was the Empire's final, brilliant flash of light before the shadows began to lengthen. Stability, however, is often an illusion in the face of nature. The very systems that made Angkor a superpower eventually became its undoing. Climate change brought a series of erratic monsoons, decades of bone-dry drought, followed by catastrophic floods that the aging canals could no longer manage. The rice engine that fed millions began to stutter. As the water grew stagnant and the soil grew tired, the administrative web that once held the provinces together started to fray. Slowly, the people began to move away, leaving the great king's monuments to the mercy of a changing world. By the time the Thai armies from the west arrived at the gates in the 15th century, Angkor was already a ghost of its former self. There was no grand final stand, only a quiet, inevitable exodus. The silk was packed away, the gold was stripped from the towers, and the forest began its slow, relentless crawl back over the sandstone. The gods were left alone in the dark, and for hundreds of years, the world outside simply forgot that the greatest city on earth had ever existed. Today, Angkor is no longer a secret kept by the vines. It stands as a testament to the fragile brilliance of human ambition. We look at these ruins and see more than just stone. We see the story of a people who mastered the earth and the water, only to be reminded that nature always has the final word. The faces of the Bayans still smile in the dappled sunlight, watching as the world returns to their feet. They remind us that empires may fall and cities may vanish, but the spirit of what we build, Angkor, was never truly lost. It was waiting. Today, nearly 3 million people walk its causeways every year, standing where kings once stood, looking up at the same stone faces that watched an empire rise and fall. The jungle gave it back to us. And perhaps that is the greatest miracle of all. The art, the faith, and the struggle remains etched in the heart of the world, eternal and unyielding,